Well, Gillian, today we're going to be talking about MS and how it's affected you in a very personal way, about how it's affected your sort of just general well-being, feelings of self-esteem and sexuality in its broadest context. So I'd like to start first by asking you about the diagnosis of MS and what led up to that and the reactions at the time.
It was a very quick diagnosis, and for that I'm now very grateful. When I sort of meet people who had umpteen dozen years before someone's actually found out what it was. I'd had optic neuritis 2 years before I was diagnosed, and went back and saw the same GP on a Monday where I really felt okay. And I had to ring into work and say, look, I'm not coming in today. I'm not sick. I just can't walk, because I'd tried to get out of bed and collapsed on the floor. But I had a weekend of the legs feeling quite funny. I'd touch them and feel like, you know, say to Norman, can you feel that strangeness there? And he couldn't feel anything different, because the sensation in the legs was different. By the time I got to the neurologist, a little knowledge might be a dangerous thing. I was working in special education, so I was aware of what these sort of things might have meant. And I kept thinking, this could be either motor neuron or MS. Hope it's MS. And as we drove there, I was saying things to Norman like, now, if it's MS, it would be better for you to leave me. Just have a life. And he was not very happy with that. And fortunately, the diagnosis was fairly quick. The neurologist went through the history and what was happening then, because the GP had been really, really thorough and had made sure that I was getting in to see a neurologist that week, because symptoms can fluctuate so much. And he said, look, I want to put you in hospital, but I'm fairly sure this is MS. Oh, good grief. Because even though I would have preferred MS to motor neuron, I would have preferred it to be neither, actually. So that was...
So when it was actually confirmed, all of those thoughts of, well, you'd rather have MS than anything else were really not quite true.
No, they weren't. I certainly would still, even then, have preferred MS to motor neuron, but I would have preferred it to be a virus or nothing. Or, and it was not difficult to accept. It was just difficult in terms of my life might have to change. But while I was in hospital having it confirmed by having a lumbar puncture, and I was pre-MRI, so I had lumbar punctures and visually evoked responses and things like that. I remember one of the residents saying to me, now, don't get too hot. I never get too hot. I love the heat. Well, I've lived to swallow those words. And I said to him, look, this isn't denial, and I still think 10 years later it wasn't denial. But I was able to say to him, unless or until things do worsen, I'm going to live my life as I'm living it now. I was a young, high-flying career woman, and I didn't want that change just because it might change.
But you had to think about that? Suddenly you were confronted with a diagnosis that might in the future lead to changes?
I didn't think about it. It wasn't so much denial, it was put on the back burner. It might happen, but it might not. So let's just have a good, positive life, and let me keep going being a professional career woman, and then I'll think about it if things do change.
How did those around you, those closest to you, react?
In my own family, because it's not a close family, that was almost a denial. It was, oh, really? And that was the end of it. I noticed that about 5 years ago my father had some information on MS, but that's 5 years down the track. With Norman's family, Norman's mother's a very loving, giving sort of person, so her response was, oh, well, That's really sad, but, you know, it really only happened to the nicest people. And that was her way of dealing with things. With Norman, it was stalwart and supportive and caring and loving, and I don't think for a while he even let himself think about what it might mean for him.
And as things moved on and you had further episodes and physical changes,
It certainly changed quite dramatically, quite quickly, for a woman who wasn't going to let this interfere. 2 years after diagnosis, I had a pregnancy failure quite late in, well, mid-term, at almost 20 weeks. And I had an exacerbation probably about 6 weeks after that. And that was quite major. Major enough for me to have to leave work. And it took me probably a couple of months, and people couldn't believe that here I was needing a walking stick and I couldn't drive anymore, and there were all these serious things. And the thing that was concerning me most was my career was gone. I'd lost my baby and my career was gone. And they were really very, very important to me. And we didn't think we'd ever try again to have a child. There was a big assumption around, like from lots of people, we'd lost a few, that it must be MS. And we had to really be quite strong with people and say, MS has got nothing to do with it. This has to do with chromosomal translocation. Nothing whatever to do with MS. But a lot of people found that very, very difficult to believe.
And did you get the feeling that they were surprised that you were even considering having a family?
They didn't at that stage, because when that all occurred, when it was really a fairly major exacerbation, and I'd recently lost a baby, up until that time, things were fine. So I was one of the many people with MS who looks perfectly okay. So there weren't too many people. Norman's mother was one, very concerned that it wasn't fair on Norman to have to look after a baby and a crippled wife. I don't think she believes that anymore. But I think that was her way of trying to help me come to terms with, maybe this is all too much, maybe it was meant to be. Yeah, meant to be was a common thing from a few people. And yes, it was meant to be, but it was meant to be because this fetus was not developing properly, and it had nothing to do with my condition at all. I think people were very surprised when we did try again. We were very surprised too when we did try again. And even more surprised when we got our little gift that we have now, who's 5 in a fortnight.
And what about as things have moved on and you've become increasingly disabled with MS? I know you've managed to change your lifestyle, and you can perhaps talk a little bit about that, but also, you know, what's it meant to you in a personal sense?
Well, it took a lot of dealing with in a personal sense, because this career woman was no longer there. I had a major exacerbation, the one that left me wheelchair bound. I have total paraplegia. When the baby was 8 weeks old. So suddenly I had to have lots of people coming in, potentially doing my parenting. And I didn't want that. And that was really very difficult. It was a big move for me to stop breastfeeding and start baclofen. And I was pretty strong about that. And I said, no, that's the only thing only I can do. And if I have to put up with these painful spasms for a year, I will. And I was strong enough for people to decide to stop pushing. And I was fortunate that I was that strong, because it turned out that I'm a bit sensitive to baclofen. I couldn't take it anyway. So I could have weaned this baby, taken baclofen for a month, and then found I'd weaned the baby and I couldn't take the medication anyway.
So it would have been a double loss.
It would have been a huge loss. And it was very huge. Norman now works from home, but he was working full-time. And so in the course of a week, I would have 7 different carers in. And it was like, who lives here? And I really had to work very hard on remembering, I live here, it's my home, these people are in to help me, and I don't have to feel guilty when I feel like I want some private space, I want some private time. I want to chat on the phone to a friend and not have someone listening to me. But it took a while to accept that I didn't have to feel guilty about that.
So were you sort of losing your identity in all of that, do you think?
To a certain extent, yes. I think not fully, and that's again because disability or not, I am a strong woman. I think for someone less assertive, identity could be lost very easily. And it's very important to keep up being assertive and being kind and caring and nice and all the things that I might have been before as well. But remembering that this is a disability, I'm the person. I reject the term disabled person because my personhood is intact, it always has been, and I hope it always will be. I am a person with a disability. It's just something like I'm a person with brown hair. Brown and white.
We don't need to go into that. So, how have you felt along that way with all of those changes and, with, you know, and to the extent that you had a lot of people coming in, about the private times and your feeling, you know, and as a woman, as a mother, as a wife through this?
They were initially very difficult because there was an element of guilt. These lovely people caring about me and doing things for me, and so there's an element of guilt when it's like, yes, that's true, they are, but I really bloody well don't want them. I'd like to be on my own. I'd like just to be a family. As things have progressed, which I always think is an unusual term, I feel that less because I now have a much smaller team because Norman's home, and I have people with whom I can have good enough relationships to say, listen, I'm just going to go out for lunch. Because my vision's deteriorated so much, sometimes it might mean, you know, can you please walk me down the street and I'll give you a ring when I want to come home. And so that's actually easier now than it was 5 years ago.
What about your relationship with Norman?
I'm really lucky, really lucky. I think we're really lucky.
But were there times where you were concerned about the effect that this, you know, as you've said initially, you thought if it is MS?
Yes, there certainly were times. There was a time when Norman was doing a play and he was out a lot and he was quite besotted. I don't believe that he had a sexual relationship. I didn't ever believe that at the time, but he was quite besotted by a very attractive woman who could do all the things that I used to be able to do and I couldn't do anymore. And I had a tiny baby on top of it. And then I used to think, this might be what happens. He's a human and he has a right to have a life of his own. That didn't last very long, and then we had time to have a weekend away and talk about things. And we did talk about things, and I think that that's something that keeps us going, that we can talk about things. We did something recently. It was our 10th wedding anniversary, and we had a reaffirmation of the original vows, and we had just like getting married all over again. It was gorgeous. That had nothing to do with me using a wheelchair, me having MS. It had to do with we really love each other and we have a good relationship and we can communicate.
So that's been very important, that maintaining that communication
Very
in the
important.
relationship right through for you.
Very important.
Right, let's just follow on from there, Gillian. If we talk a little bit about how you feel now as a woman. You talked about the person with a disability. What about the woman with a disability?
It's very hard to believe that as a woman, I'm the quality of woman that I used to be. Because the quality of woman that I used to be included not only career woman, professional woman, but also sexual woman, outgoing woman, initiating woman. Taking initiative when you can barely move is really quite difficult. And so that's very different, and I don't necessarily feel happy about it. And I think that's probably what led me 5 years ago now to feel that maybe Norman could go off and have an affair, because he can't get from me what he used to get from me. I wasn't only a high flyer at work, I was a high flyer in the bedroom. I had a good time. He had a good time. And just recently we've talked about it, when I'd said sex had really become an almost non-event. And a lot of that was because I used the term vessel. I feel like a vessel because I can't necessarily get things. I can still give things. I can still use hands and mouth and parts of me from above the waist, but I can't necessarily feel anything in return, and I was starting to feel like I had to perform, otherwise that side of our relationship was in trouble, and it's definitely different. But by the same token, I didn't really want to, because I was feeling like I'm doing all the giving and I'm not getting anything back, not because Norman doesn't want to give back, just because my body doesn't want to receive. And so that's really huge, because it's very important. If you've been a woman who's been a sexual woman, an assertive woman, enjoyed the fun of it all, it's very important to all of a sudden work out, how do I deal with this? And I don't think I deal with that very well. I think I deal with most things well, but I don't think I deal with that well. And I don't think I ever will.
Have there been any strategies as far as sort of managing the MS that have helped in any way in that regard?
If I have a really good stretch, so that the physiotherapy exercises are done beforehand, then it means spasticity doesn't get in the way, and so we can actually have intercourse. If we talk about it beforehand, so that I don't feel like a vessel, I feel like these are your other erogenous zones that do feel something, and we play with them. I think play is almost the imperative word, because people still need to play, so that then it feels more equal. But I don't know that I'm ever going to be completely satisfied as a sexual woman. I look back and think, I'm 39, I had my last orgasm at probably 33, maybe 34 if I'm lucky. You don't sort of count each one that you have thinking this is going to be your last one. You don't expect them to be your last one. And, I look back at those times and think, that's what I want. I want that feeling, and I want it at least once before I die.
How do you think those around you and those helping you and those health professionals that you've come in contact with have dealt with that? Have they totally not acknowledged it, or has there been some consideration that these might be real issues for you?
Yeah, that's the neurodevelopmental thing. The first time I knew it was an issue, I was in hospital. Natalie would have been 8 or 10 weeks old. It was just after I'd had this exacerbation. So obviously there was something, I can't even remember what it was, but something not happening for me sexually, because I wanted my GP to put that in my referral to my neurologist, which he did. And it was just fortunate he read me the referral. Otherwise I never would have known that it was mentioned. That clearly meant this is the wrong person to discuss it with. So I didn't bring it up as part of the consultation, because I figured he's got it on paper in front of him, and if he's not raising it, it just means he's not comfortable with it.
Right.
So I let that go. We did lots of reading, and in those days I could still read things. I didn't have the degree of visual impairment I've got now. And basically what we found was almost everything that was written about men. So glad this is about women and sexuality. And then I went to see my GP, who's just been terrific with it all, and he referred me to a geriatrician, which is very hard to deal with, but she was probably going to be the person most likely to help. She felt that she wasn't, and her response to my GP was how lovely it was to see Norman and I together and know that we know about eroticism and we know about the importance of relationship and being physically intimate without the sexuality. But I was still focusing on this one thing that I was missing out on very much. And so I let it go for a while. And then I went back to see him and said it's time I went to see my gynaecologist to see what she can come up with. The geriatrician had recommended seeing my urologist, and if I need to I will see him, but I'll see my gynaecologist first. I have a sense that she may have a better understanding of what I'm talking about. My urologist is a wonderful doctor, and he's been terrific with everything I've needed to work on with the bladder, which is also something that's not particularly sexy and can definitely get in the way of things. But I don't know that he will necessarily understand female sexuality. I might be wrong, and I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I'll see my gynaecologist first. So I think I've just been very lucky to find a GP who's willing to talk about these things, and I think I probably put him in an awkward position because the poor man kept saying, now if this is getting too personal, you have every right not to answer me, as he asked me some pretty personal questions. And it was only when I came home I said to Norman, the poor guy, I just realised he's the one who was really embarrassed. I'm past being embarrassed, I want answers. But there aren't many answers.
Okay, Norman, well, I found it very interesting to hear Gillian talk about her experiences of MS and being a woman, I should say being a woman primarily, and the impact of MS on her life. If we just go back to the time that Gillian was diagnosed with MS, I mean, what was happening for you at that time?
It was, I think it was pretty unreal for me. I didn't know anything at all about MS. I had heard about MS, but knew nothing about what it meant. So I had no preconceptions about where the disease was likely to go, what was likely to happen. This was just something that we, were going to have to deal with. And I guess for a while I went into some kind of denial process, because not only did I not know about MS, I didn't really want to know. I didn't spend a lot of time reading material. Like, we got material from the MS library, and Gillian read through that. But I skimmed through it, I looked at it, but I didn't really want to take it in. I was busy working, I was busy with my career and setting up in a new school, new job, new direction, those sorts of things. And I guess I was of the mind that says, we'll see how things go, we'll live one day at a time, which had always been my way of living anyway. So while Gillian seemed perfectly normal, apart from the fact that she had periods of fatigue, and there were times where her gait was a bit unsteady, otherwise she was pretty well the same woman that I knew and fell in love with, and life went on as normal. So it didn't really affect me greatly at that initial time.
When you skimmed through the literature, can you remember what kind of was floating through your mind?
Yeah, a lot of it was, I guess it's fairly common too, is that, oh, this is what's happened to other people, but it doesn't seem to be happening to us. And the other part of that was, well, we'll cross that bridge when and if we come to it. If we reach a point where we have to make this kind of change to our lifestyle, okay, we'll do it. But it's not happening now, and therefore I could sort of put it out of my mind to some degree.
So a little bit of a feeling that this might not happen to us.
Yeah, well, it's not so much it might not, but it wasn't worth thinking about or worrying about unless it happened. There was, you know, much more of life to live than worrying about what disasters could occur in the future.
And that's fairly similar to Gillian in a way. I think Gillian sort of mentioned that she wanted to get on with it and still wanted to continue to achieve. And so it sounds like you were fairly approached in the same way.
Pretty much. I mean, we talked about it. It wasn't that I went into a period of totally ignoring its existence. But it was like, our life's okay as it is. We live our life normally. And we would continue to do so. And one of the things that Gillian indicated was that life continued to be normal. And from my point of view, for a lot of the time, even when Gillian's disability was becoming more evident, each change was fairly gradual. So we were able then to treat each change as though it were normal.
Right.
So our life continued to be normal, even though from looking in hindsight, major changes had taken place.
Right.
But at the time, it was a normal existence.
Right.
And to some degree, that's continued right till now. I mean, we're now in a situation where she's totally wheelchair-bound. I'm at home much of the time as primary carer. I have to help her move in and out of the chair, toilet, bed, all of those sorts of things. And yet, it's our normal way of living. So it's still normal.
Mm-hmm. So in making that transition, which comes across as a gradual, you know, things got worse for Gillian and, you know, you had to respond to that and deal with that and keep your life going. Have there been sort of like crisis times for you or times where this has hit you more than others?
Yeah, a couple of times. Gillian mentioned the time, well, the fact that I was working meant that a lot of it I didn't see. A lot of the trouble that Gillian was having physically, I didn't actually see because I was at work. So I'd be teaching during the day and I'd come home and help out, you know, I'd take over the running of the house at night, but I wouldn't have seen or known what's gone on during the day. And it's come out later that Gillian had all sorts of problems, physical problems, fatigue and continence problems, all of those sorts of things that I didn't know about during the day. And she chose not to tell me. So we went through a period of time of what she called need to know. It's like, this is what I think Norman needs to know, and this is what he doesn't need to know about. And it reached a point, what Gillian mentioned, the play that I was doing. I was doing a play at Ballarat National Theatre. And I was out late rehearsing, performing, and after-show parties, and sitting up till all hours of the morning talking to people, and to one woman in particular that I struck a chord with, I guess. And that was really exciting. And I was having a terrific time. I mean, my life was like it used to be 15 years before when I was involved in theatre in Melbourne, staying up all night and chatting and talking. And you know, there was never anything sexual or any of that kind of element to the relationships. It was just exciting and new, and I felt that I was somebody who was admired because of, you know, what kind of actor I was and all this sort of stuff. It was a very exciting time. And one night I came home or one morning I came home and it was like 4 o'clock in the morning. Gillian had been home all night with, you know, she'd gone through a pregnancy, I'd been in and out, she'd had a young baby and I'd been in and out. And I came home and it was like, it hit me between the eyes because I was confronted with the reality of Gillian's physical situation, because she had reached a point where she wasn't going to take it anymore and said, right now, bang, this is what it's like. Now, if this is the way life's going to be, you better get on your bike, son, because, you know, we haven't got a relationship. It was like, whoa. And I had to really take stock of of what I was doing and what we were about. And yeah,
So
that was a major crisis.
So was the fact that Julian, as she described herself, was a very strong person and was going to always, attack having MS with 100% energy, that it almost meant in a way you didn't notice what was happening to her, or that maybe she had kept so many things from you that you weren't sort of maybe quite in tune with where she was at?
I noticed what was obvious, and I had some intuitive sense of what else might be happening, but I was not conscious of the degree of it. Julian made an active choice to tell me what I needed to know, because she didn't want me spending all day at work worrying about what was happening at home. She wanted me to be able to put my energies into my work at the school. And when we had that crisis point, if you like, I had to then say, okay, well, look, I do need to know, I want to know these things. It's almost like, I need to know everything. Tell me all there is. It was pretty painful, because I learned things about what was happening to her that I hadn't been conscious of, and felt guilty because I hadn't been conscious. Like, I should have known. I should have noticed this. I should have known that. And so for the first time since she was diagnosed, I went through a period where I actually felt guilty about what was happening to her, and the fact that I was hale and hearty and living a normal life outside of the home, and that I realised I'd been pretty selfish in that. Looking back on it now, I think that it wasn't so much a being selfish, it was a reaching out for life, hanging on rather too tightly to those parts of life that I really could get excited about, because things were obviously different at home.
Do you think that maybe there was an underneath feeling of I have to get out and live life while I can, that, the future's a little bit unknown, I don't really know what's happening, but this is exciting and I'm going to run with this while I can?
I think that's what I was doing, but I don't think I was conscious of doing it.
Yeah.
It's only in hindsight that I think, yeah, maybe I was doing that. But I didn't at any stage think, well, life's going to be pretty ordinary from here on in, I better go out and get some excitement. No, I never actually planned it in advance. It was more that I was grabbing at it while it was there. The show I was doing was a lot of fun. The people were a lot of fun to be around. And it was interesting because I did another show a couple of years later, and it was an entirely different experience. It was go to rehearsal finishes, come home. Go and do the performance, come home. There was none of that sort of let's party, let's, it was an entirely different approach, and a much more satisfying one, I think, for both of us. So one of the things that happens, because Julian and I do communicate very well, and more so since that time, is that when we've reached a crisis like that, we've been able to talk it through without it being destructive. It's always been something that's been positive, and we've built on the relationship as a result. It hasn't whittled away at the relationship. Since I've been home, since I left teaching and have been home, we've been able to talk far more often, far more freely about what's going on, because it's there, it's in front of us the whole time. And there isn't this, I need to keep this from Norman, because I don't want him to be, unhappy, or those kind of feelings as much as there was before.
Are there times that you feel sad for Julian, or feel her losses, or your losses?
Oh, yes. Yeah. There are times where I look at the wheelchair and I just want to put a bomb under it. It's like, I look at, as Julian mentioned, the life we used to have, and think, that was fantastic. We had a ball. We really, it was terrific. And life doesn't have those experiences anymore, those particularly physical ones. And I look at the things we can't do. We can't just head off somewhere. We have to make sure that wherever we're going to stay is wheelchair accessible, has wheelchair accessible toilets, showers, all of those sorts of things. We can't just decide, let's get in the car and head down the coast for a couple of days. example, let's head up Central Victoria or those sorts of things. Everything has to be much more carefully planned. And that's true in our personal relationship too. The element of spontaneity is something that has gone. It's like we cannot be spontaneous as a couple in the way that we used to. We can do small things like suddenly turn up with a bunch of flowers or a card, and again those things I can do. I can go down to the newsagents and see a card and think, oh, I'd love to give that to Gillian, and buy it and do it. She can't do that. She can't go in there without assistance. And with the one we've got, to get to the cards, you've got to go upstairs anyway. So, you know, that kind of spontaneous giving, which she used to do just as much as I, she can no longer do. So it's still, you know, it's been a very sort of one-sided thing in all sorts of ways. Gillian mentioned the fact that in terms of our sexual relationship, she feels like she's the one doing all the giving because physically she's not able to receive. She doesn't have a sensation that she used to have. She can't physically feel what she used to feel. So she felt like, you know, if there was a sexual relationship, she is the one who does the giving. I'll do the initiating, but in reality, the one who is actually doing the giving is her. She's not actually receiving anything. It's one-sided.
So how have you dealt with that? And I think Gillian described being a sexual high flyer, and I noticed that you really responded to that.
Yeah.
How have you come to terms with those sort of alterations in your sexual relationship?
Yeah, that's a difficult one because for a period of time I just went into, I guess it went into suspension. It was like, it was normal. It was going back to that old, this is what we've got to live with, so this is what we live with. And I didn't feel for quite some time particularly frustrated by all that. It's only when we've actually talked about our mutual frustration with it that it comes home. My personal frustration wasn't really all that much there because I could still receive. And being male and being fairly selfish about being male sexually, I was quite happy to do the receiving. And I knew that I couldn't do the giving that I used to be able to do. But again, I wasn't actually really aware that was affecting Gillian very much. It's only recently when it's been come up more in our conversation. And we had the conversation in which Gillian described that she felt like a vessel. That again, it's another crisis point, I guess. It's come home to me that, hey, this isn't an equal relationship sexually, and we need to work at it, to talk about it, to do things to try and make it more of an equal relationship.
So is it sometimes the feeling of that Gillian will get to these points before you?
Oh, yes.
That, so for you as Gillian's partner, you're trying to see and trying to feel what she's going through, but that's not always possible. That something will happen and she'll tell you?
Well, yeah, yes and no. I'm not sure that I'm actually trying constantly to see life through Gillian's eyes or see what's happening to Gillian, because I'm having to live my life and our life through my own. And so there will be times I won't see what's happening until she says so, until she says, hey, wait a minute, stop, we need to talk about this. Other times I will see that there are things that need to be addressed and we need to do things, and I don't need to pick up the cues from her. But in this area, it certainly is one that we've suddenly realised, hey, we've got to do something here. We were at the GP's a while ago. Gillian had a urinary tract infection, and she said to the GP, I don't know quite how to put this. She said, a woman of my age, but I think this was brought on by honeymoon cystitis. And our GP said, congratulations. That's because he realised that, hey, for her to have honeymoon cystitis, something must have happened. And it's because we had started to talk about things, we started working things out, we started to realise that we're going to have to plan our sexual activity. We can't just say, hey, tap, tap, let's go. It has to be really worked out. And in dealing with the infection, the GP said, now, this is what you're going to have to do to make sure these things don't occur again. One of the things you're going to have to do is to tell Norman, no violence and nothing kinky. Well, Julian said, no, violence is fine, but if you can think of anything kinky, you know...
I'm not prepared to give that up.
Quite right. And I pointed out, I said, listen, making love with somebody who's likely to go into major spasm at any moment, either extensor spasm or adductor spasm where the knees suddenly go crack like that together, is about as kinky as I get these days. And I think the doctor would be a bit embarrassed by it. But it indicated that we were at a stage now where we are able to really think about what both of us are likely to get from our relationship, what both of us are able to give and able to receive, and how we talk about it beforehand, and we actually think about it and plan it. And,
yes, with the topic of sexuality, in a way, being a bit of a taboo topic, not often discussed, and I really understand you talk to Gillian quite a lot about that. Have you ever felt the need to maybe talk to people on a broader scale, either close friends or just in terms of about your own sexuality and some of the adjustments that you've had to make?
Not in any formalised way. I mean, it comes up from time to time in discussions with people, and it's something that I'm quite comfortable talking about.
Do people ever ask you?
Not out of the blue. I mean, I haven't got people who come up and say, with you too, like, how do you, I don't understand how you can, those sorts of questions. Although it'd be interesting if they did. No, people don't. They kind of assume that it's like it's our business. And like you said, it's a taboo subject. So even amongst people with MS, I remember when we had a session a couple of years ago down at the centre in St Albans, and this question was raised, this whole idea of sexuality was raised. Everybody suddenly said, yeah, nobody told us about this. Nobody told us that this might be a problem. Because it's something, it's your private life, you don't talk about it. And I think you need to talk about it.
Well, I guess in a way, one of the things that yourself and Gillian have really demonstrated is the growth in your own relationship through talking about it. That you've hit these moments that it needed to be discussed, and you've had the capacity to, one way or another, start discussing it.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's never been a time where I felt like leaving the relationship. There's been plenty of times where I've been thoroughly pissed off with the relationship and with MS and with all of the things that it's needed and demanded. But there's never been a time where I thought, I'm out of here. I've had enough. And what's happened in the last few weeks is that the opposite's occurred. It's cemented for me that this is where I want to be. Thank you.
Right.
And,
what's happened that's brought that home?
I think that the whole crisis about Gillian talking about feeling like a vessel and my not being able to understand why she didn't initiate anything. Or when I'd initiate something, there would be this reluctance where there never used to be. And actually talking it through. And me suddenly realising, yeah, there is something we can do about this. We can improve the quality of the relationship. Gillian said before that there may not be anything ultimately that will bring her back to the sort of orgasmic state that she wanted to be. That may not ever be possible. But we can work towards getting there far more than we have done. And talking that through was like some kind of catharsis that said, hey, and we've moved into like a new phase of relationship, if you like.
Right.
So that from here it's a growth platform rather than what was happening where it was stagnating.
Right, and Julian's feeling less of a vessel.
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah. And I guess one of the goals is that last orgasm before she dies, isn't it? That's a pretty solid goal to aim for.
Yeah, I'm happy to work on that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it is something that in itself is important because it, from my reading of it, it cements this sense of Gillian being a whole woman. It's not just an orgasm for the sake of orgasm, although that'd be nice too. But it's that whole woman confirmation, I guess.
It's been really terrific to hear you both talk about your relationship and how you've had to accommodate MS into your life and the drive that you've both got to keep things going along as normal as possible. In looking at the last sort of few months, when obviously there's been some issues that have presented themselves, where are you up to now in talking about that together?
Oh, I think talking's pretty good. I still haven't had that orgasm before I die, but I think the talking's pretty good. We're very lucky in that we do know how to talk to one another. And so the times when we can't talk to one another are few and far between.
But the other thing is, on this particular issue, we're talking about it more on a daily basis. It's like it's in the forefront. It's not something that is stuck for the hours between sort of 10 o'clock at night and first thing in the morning. So we're actually far more conscious of it now as something to work with rather than having it something we have to put up with. I think probably every day.
Yeah, we've always been able to be funny and make jokes and those sort of things, but now we're actually being funny and making jokes, but about what we're going to do next, not just about the topic.
Right. Norman sort of recounted the recent time where he didn't feel he had picked up your feelings of being a vessel, and that was very new information for him. What was going through your mind at the time that you brought that up? I mean, where did you think he was at?
Oh, I think it was pretty new information for me too. It was just something that came up as part of the discussion, and it was a realisation. Hang on, this is why I've withdrawn a bit. This is how I'm feeling. So I don't know what was really going on for me. I just know that as part of the discussion, I was able to come out with what's a fairly strong term and realise that that's actually how I was feeling.
A very difficult question to ask you, but I'll ask it anyway. You know, what sort of social or society pressures do you feel are placed on you to not talk about your sexuality?
Oh, I'm not sure that there are any pressures because people don't believe that someone like me could be a sexual person anyway. One of the great examples of that was a carer of mine who had a next-door neighbour say to her, "Does Gillian ever have sex?" And instead of responding in any formal sort of sense, she said, "I don't know, do you?" And really that's where it's at. My carers and the people I'm close to know that, yes, I still have a sexual relationship. But it's not so much societal pressures as a societal lack of understanding.
Right, or a societal view, or an assumption that you don't have sex.
Yes, yeah, I think that's a fairly strong assumption.
I think one of the things that's shifted a bit for us recently is that for quite a period of time, Gillian said that she couldn't understand how I could even view her as a sexual being, as attractive as she used to be, that I could be sexually excited by her. She just didn't believe that that was possible, couldn't understand it. And one of the things that I think has shifted is that she now realises that, yes, I can, and yes, I should, and yes, I will continue to do so. And it's not a surprise.
It's because you said it yourself, darling, you're kinky.
So Norman, I mean, in a way you talk about that as if that hasn't really even been an adjustment for you, that Gillian's just, in a way, always been sexy to you.
Yeah.
Is that how it is?
Pretty well. I mean, there are a few times where, you know, when we haven't made it to the toilet and it's messy and all those sorts of things, and I think, you know, I just don't like this. But it hasn't ever been a question in terms of my sexual attraction to Gillian. because when I'm dealing with those sorts of issues, it's almost like my mind goes into carer mode, and I think, oh, well, I better clean this up. But it's not, this is the woman that I love, that I make love with, who is making, you know, that this mess is happening to. So, no, Gillian's no less sexually attractive to me now than she's ever been. It's a performance issue. It's the fact that we can no longer do the high flying we used to do because of the physical restrictions. But that's got nothing to do with how I see Gillian as a person. No.
Right. You mentioned there, Norman, about that in the sense that you put your carer's hat on and do that part of your role. Is it sort of in a way like you're two different people, or does that blend together a bit more?
It blends together. I mean, I change hats. It's something that I've always done, and living in a small town, it's something you have to do anyway. I mean, I work as a family therapist, and I meet people who've got all sorts of major issues in their relationship, in their families, whatever, and I meet those same people on the golf course. And I change hats. We don't talk about those issues on the golf course. I work as a masseur, and I meet people who've got all sorts of physical issues that I deal with as a massage therapist, but I don't talk about their rhomboids or whatever it is when I meet them in the pub. So you learn to change hats very readily, and I guess in this sense it's more of the same. It's just a change of hat, and it happens automatically. I don't have to think about it.
Right. Are there any comments, constructive comments for health professionals or doctors or people that are, you know, working within our system, that any words that you would say to those people about what the role they can play?
They can, if the person who comes to see them hasn't initiated discussions, gently initiate discussion. And it might be that the person isn't ready, but it's a bit like family therapy. If you plant the seed, the therapy can happen in the car on the way home. If people just know that actually they've got permission to want to know more about their sexuality. And I think that's really important for not only doctors, all health professionals, that it is something that is a huge part of human relationships. And it's not something all of a sudden you can forget about or turn a blind eye to.
Yeah, and I would say letting people know as early as possible that this could become an issue within their relationship. That one of the byproducts, if you like, of MS is that you are going to possibly lose some sensation. I mean, men with MS are not going to be able to have an erection. They may need to be aware of it earlier, and that the professionals involved are there to support them through that, rather than pretend it's an issue. We'll discuss it when it comes to the surface. It's like a number of things with MS, I think, that we're learning, that the earlier we know about it as a potential issue, the better prepared we can be to deal with it.
And so in a way that's really introducing it or allowing it to be discussed much earlier in the process.
Absolutely.
To give couples an opportunity, maybe at the beginning, to start to discuss or that it's acceptable to discuss?
Yes, it's like when we had that meeting at St Albans. It was clear with all those couples that were there that many of them had never actually discussed it between them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that opening up of communication between the couple, not just with other people, but in the relationship, to say, look, it's okay to talk about this and communicate about it, because it's the only way that you're actually ever going to be able to deal with it. Rather than wait till it reaches crisis point, the relationship breaks down, and one or other of the partners can't cope with the change in their relationship and takes off.
And that was very interesting for you, wasn't it, at St Albans, because that was the first time you'd understood what I was talking about when there was a guy there who said, what's the point in these penile implants or whatever? They're not going to make any difference. I'm still not going to feel it.
Mm.
And that was the first time it came home to you. Hang on, this is what she's talking about. She doesn't feel it.
Yep. Yeah, it was. And that was because it was out in the open. It was being discussed at a forum. So you've got two levels of discussion. You've got within the relationship and also within a public forum that has the MS focus.
Mm. And I guess, you know, my memory of that session was in a way the normalising of the sexual relationship, that in a way, yes, MS affects it, but the sexual relationship is there pre-MS, post-MS.
Sure.
Look, I'd just like to thank you very, very much for agreeing to do this interview, and you know, very, very certain that in doing it you've provided a resource that will enable people to access this much earlier in the process of having MS, because they can watch the video. So I thank you very, very much for doing that.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
I've been very privileged today to listen to Gillian and Norman discuss not just their sexual relationship, but many issues that MS has confronted them with and that they've had to deal with. And it really matches a growing awareness of staff that work at MS societies across the world of the importance of enabling couples to discuss some very personal and sensitive aspects of their relationship. And I really see Gillian and Norman as trailblazing of putting it on the map so that we can discuss it and work towards better solutions for, you know, for people that are affected by MS and their partners.